Tonight, we will discover the story of the 13th century's greatest adventurer. Once there were eyes that saw unknown worlds, ears that heard the voices of distant lands, and a mind that pushed the boundaries of the era's imagination. Marco Polo, not just a merchant, but a brave soul who built the first bridges between East and West. Before we begin, don't forget to support us by liking our content and subscribing to the channel. Also, share your location and current time with us. Sometimes our stories can take you to distant lands. Sometimes we may search for lost times in familiar streets. Now let's dim the lights, open the windows for a light sea breeze, and tonight let's embark together on Marco Polo's extraordinary journey. In 1254, in Venice, where the canals sparkled with golden lights, a child was born in the modest home of the Polo family. The city where Marco was born was not just a city. It was the New York of that time, the heart of world trade, the heart of a magical port where East and West met. Venice was one of Europe's richest and most cosmopolitan cities of that period. On its docks, Byzantine merchants, Arab sailors, Armenian caravan owners, and Greek bankers stood side by side. Every morning, conversations in hundreds of different languages rose in its harbor. The scents of spices, silk, and precious stones filled the air. However, Marco's story did not begin ordinarily. His father, Niccolo, and uncle Maffeo had already gone far away before he was born, lost in the mysterious lands beyond the Black Sea. Marco's first breath was taken in a fatherless world. This absence shaped the young boy's imagination. He grew up hearing only stories about his father, a brave merchant, an adventurer chasing the unknown, someone seeking the secrets of distant lands. His mother, Donna, would tell him stories while he grew up in Venice's narrow streets. In the mornings, they would go to San Marco Square and feed the pigeons. Donna would tell her son about the great explorers of ancient times, encouraging him to dream. "Look, my son," she would say to Marco, "at those ships. Each one comes from a different world, and your father is inside such a world right now." Marco would trace maps with his little fingers, imagining what lay beyond the sea. In the evenings, his mother would read him stories of ancient heroes before bed. Odysseus's journey, Alexander's conquests, Sinbad's adventures. Three things shaped Marco's mind during his childhood: Venice's cosmopolitan atmosphere, the curiosity born from his father's absence, and the excitement of ships returning to port, bringing the era's most valuable treasures. With each ship's return, little Marco would wait at the dock. Maybe this time his father would return too. Sailors would tell him stories from distant countries, great deserts, snowy mountains, golden cities. Each story expanded Marco's imagination a little more. While his peers played games, Marco would sit at the dock, listening to merchants from distant countries, Arabic speakers, Byzantines, Armenians. Each opened a door to a different world in his mind. Marco learned Venice's lingua franca at an early age, the language of trade. This language, a mixture of Latin, Greek, and Arabic words, had become the common language of Mediterranean trade. The young boy practiced by talking with merchants at the dock, taking notes of their stories. At that time, Venice had developed its trade with the East, also influenced by the Crusades. The city was Europe's distribution center for silk, spices, and precious stones, coming through Constantinople. Marco grew up in the midst of this wealth, but it wasn't just material wealth. Cultural wealth was everything surrounding him. He saw art pieces brought from the East in the mosaics of San Marco Basilica, examined Chinese porcelain and Persian carpets on the walls of their homes. And then, in the year 1269, when he was 15 years old, a miracle happened. His father and uncle returned after exactly 9 years. But this wasn't just a homecoming. They came with Kublai Khan's golden seal and a special message for the Pope. Marco never forgot that day. When the door knocked, his mother opened it, trembling. Standing at the door were 2 men, sunburned, with hard looks but familiar faces. His father, Niccolo, looked at Marco for a long time. He was no longer a child. He had become a young man. "Are you my son?" he asked in amazement. That first night, as family members tried to get to know each other, Niccolo and Maffeo told incredible stories. They had crossed the Black Sea, followed the Volga, then turned south and reached Bukhara. There they met Mongol diplomats, and thanks to them, appeared before the great Kublai Khan. The Khan received them with great interest, asked questions about Christianity, and asked them to write a letter to the Pope. What Niccolo and Maffeo told turned young Marco's world upside down. They spoke of the Mongol Empire, the Silk Roads, places where religion and culture were completely different from the usual. Kublai Khan, the most powerful man in the world, wanted to establish friendship with the Pope. As Marco listened to his father's voice those nights, he wasn't just listening to stories. He was designing his future. Those narrow Venice streets no longer sufficed for him. Something else was calling in his soul, the call of the unknown. For weeks the family discussed what they would do. The Pope's message was serious, and they needed to return. But this time the situation was different. Marco wanted to come too. Initially, Niccolo hesitated. This journey was too dangerous for a young boy, but Marco's determination and his mother Donna's support finally convinced the father. "My son is no longer a child," said Donna, "and perhaps this journey is in his destiny." In 1271, when he was only 17 years old, Marco made the biggest decision of his life. When his father and uncle returned to Kublai Khan with the Pope's message, Marco would join them too. This wasn't just a trip. It was crossing the boundaries of the known world. In Europe at that time, most people died without seeing 50 kilometers beyond the village where they were born. Marco was setting out for a world thousands of kilometers away. Amid dear Mother Donna's tears, Marco said, "Mother, I will return and tell you such stories that everyone in Venice will admire." Neither Marco at that time nor his mother knew that this farewell would last 24 years. When Donna hugged her son for the last time, she gave him a cross. "May this always protect you," she said. Marco carried this cross throughout his life. The day they set out, a small ship swayed in Venice's Grand Canal. Marco stood at the edge of the ship and looked at his homeland for the last time. San Marco's campanile, the Doge's palace, familiar domes. Behind him was everything he was familiar with. Ahead was a completely unknown world. When the ship left the canal and opened to the Adriatic, Marco took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The journey on the Silk Road was difficult and dangerous beyond what modern minds can grasp. Marco and his relatives first went to Jerusalem, from there crossed the Mediterranean to Anatolia, and then proceeded into the depths of the East. At their first stop in Acre, near the Crusader fortress, they took fresh water and provisions. Here they received official documents from Pope Gregory X. The Pope had given them 2 priests, but the priests got scared of the journey's difficulties and turned back. In Anatolia, they encountered the first major difficulty. In these lands controlled by the Seljuk Turks, caravans were under constant threat of attack. Marco experienced real danger for the first time. At night, they stood guard. During the day, they tried to move as fast as possible. After Trebizond, they were now in completely unknown territory. The land route was difficult and dangerous, but Marco was enjoying every moment. Deserts, mountains, snowstorms. Every step was a new challenge. They struggled with thirst in the deserts of Khorasan, had trouble breathing on the icy peaks of the Pamir Mountains, and Marco wrote in his diary, "Here, even fire doesn't burn properly. It's as if the world operates by different rules. The air is so thin that sometimes my head spins. But the view. Has such beauty ever been seen in this world?" While passing through the Wakhan Valley, they met yak nomads. These people were living a life Marco had never seen. They had developed the art of surviving in high mountains, in low oxygen, in extreme cold. Marco tried to learn their culture, their language. Every society he met amazed him, but the biggest change was happening in Marco's mind. Every new city, every different culture, every unusual tradition was surprising and expanding him. In Bukhara, he began learning Persian. In Samarkand, he took astronomy lessons. These cities were the science and culture centers of the world at that time. Libraries, observatories, madrasas from the golden age of Islamic civilization fascinated Marco. In Samarkand, he saw copies of Ibn Sina's medical books. In Bukhara, he studied Al-Khwarizmi's mathematical works. Marco wasn't just making geographical discoveries. He was making intellectual discoveries too. In every city, he was meeting different scientists, learning from them. 3.5 years. For 1,300 days, they walked, rode horses, traveled with caravans. Marco was no longer that young Venetian. The desert sun had bronzed his skin. The difficult journey had steeled his character. Now he could speak several languages, recognize different currencies, understood various cultures, traditions. Crossing the Gobi Desert was the most difficult part. Miles of stretching sands, extreme temperature differences between day and night, scarcity of water sources. Marco wrote that he heard the voices of devils in this desert. At night, the wind made such sounds that it was as if someone was calling his name. When they reached the caravanserais, they felt as if they had reached heaven. In 1275, when they finally arrived at Kublai Khan's capital, Khan Balik, present-day Beijing, a world Marco couldn't even imagine opened before his eyes. The city was so large that beside Venice it seemed like a giant. Golden roofs, jade decorations, palaces for thousands of people. Millions of people lived in the streets, everyone engaged in different work. Marco admired this organization, and most importantly, Kublai Khan, the man who held the world in the palm of his hand. When they first met, the Khan looked at Marco for a long time and said, "You have come a long way, young man. Now you belong here. Now a long journey begins, but this time spiritually." These words would change Marco's life. Marco's life completely changed at Kublai Khan's palace. Although initially he was seen only as the young man beside his father, very soon his sharp intelligence and power of observation attracted attention. The Khan noticed that the young Venetian learned languages quickly, could understand different cultures. Marco learned Mongolian, Chinese. He grasped court protocol. The Khan began sending Marco on special missions. First small diplomatic missions, then examination of trade routes, and then governance in the empire's distant provinces. In every mission, Marco presented excellent reports. The Khan liked his detailed observations. Marco wasn't just saying taxes were collected. He was making detailed analyses like how the people live, what they think, what their problems are. In these missions, Marco wasn't just serving, he was learning. He became the first European to see China's paper money system. In a period when barter system was still used in Europe, paper money was being used in China. Marco described this as follows. The Khan's power is so great that he can give value to pieces made from tree bark, and everyone accepts it. He saw the great canals, a water system of thousands of kilometers. He discovered the organized postal network. Messages reached from one end of the empire to the other, in days through mounted couriers. He learned how big cities were managed. In China, censuses were conducted, trade was recorded. Even births and deaths were recorded. During his governorship of Yangzhou, Marco encountered things no European had ever seen before. 2 million people lived in the city. This number was 10 times more than Europe's largest cities. And these people lived within an orderly system. Clean water systems, sewage, market order, security. Marco also became acquainted with Chinese technology. Gunpowder, compass, printing technology. These inventions that would come to Europe centuries later were part of daily life in China. Marco carefully studied these technologies, learned how they worked. At night in the guest houses where he stayed, he kept a diary. Today I saw coal being used as fuel. Black stones give fire. Who would believe this in Europe? A place without wood shortage, as if wood coming from underground. Or I discovered something called porcelain. It's made from clay but as beautiful as precious stones. So thin that the liquid inside can be seen, but so strong that sometimes it doesn't break even if dropped. He stayed in China for 17 years. During this time, he was not just a governor, but also a cultural bridge. While internalizing the wisdom of the East, he managed to preserve the perspective of the West. He learned Confucius's teachings, understood Buddhism's philosophy, but also preserved his Christian identity. During his time in China, Marco traveled to many places. He saw spice gardens in South China, tasted hot peppers in Sichuan, visited silk workshops in Hangzhou. Everywhere he took notes, made drawings. This information would later be very important in the development of Europe's trade with the East. But there was a growing longing inside him. Venice, his family, his mother tongue. As time passed, this longing grew. He communicated his wish to leave to the Khan several times, but the Khan didn't want to let him go. Marco was a valuable advisor, a trustworthy administrator. Also, the Khan had truly loved him, saw him as a son. In 1292, an opportunity finally arose. Princess Kokachin, a close relative of Kublai Khan, would go as a bride to the Mongol Khan in Iran. The land route was closed due to wars. A sea voyage was necessary. Reliable guides were needed for this difficult task, and the Khan gave this task to the Polos. Perhaps the Khan understood Marco's longing and was giving him the chance to return home. This was both a mission and an opportunity to return home for them. They left China with a large fleet of 14 ships. Marco was now 38 years old and had spent almost his entire life in the East. The moment of departure was very emotional. The Khan gave him valuable gifts, prepared special documents. "You are always a son of this place," said the Khan as they bid farewell. The sea voyage was as difficult as the land route. Storms, pirates, diseases. The passage from the China Sea to the Indian Ocean was dangerous. Philippines, Indonesia, India. Each stop was a new adventure, an opportunity to meet a new culture. In Sumatra, he observed the valuable spice trade. Black pepper, cloves, cinnamon. He knew these spices were worth gold in Europe. In Sumatra, he also encountered tribes that practiced cannibalism. Marco carefully recorded this experience too, describing it without exaggeration. In India, he visited diamond mines, met pearl hunters. Pearl hunters in the Indian Ocean would dive into the depths of the sea, holding their breath, taking great risks to extract pearls. Marco listened to the stories of these brave people. They approached the last stop in the Persian Gulf. Here they delivered Princess Cocachin. Throughout the long journey, they had protected the princess's health, safely reaching their destination. The princess cried when leaving. She had loved Marco and his family. In 1295, exactly 24 years later, when they arrived in Venice, Marco was now completely different. From his clothes to his accent, from his way of thinking to his behavior, everything had changed. No one in Venice recognized them. Their house had been occupied by others. The family was thought to be dead. Marco's mother Donna had died. This news deeply shook him. He was a young man when he bid her farewell. Now he was a middle-aged man. He would never experience maternal love again. This loss spoiled the taste of the entire journey. His family had difficulty recognizing him. He was now neither fully Venetian nor fully Chinese. He was a unique person caught between two worlds. While speaking, he occasionally used Chinese words, told of Mongol traditions. Venetians looked at him with suspicion. Shortly after returning to Venice, the city was at war with Genoa. This was part of the long wars for control of the Adriatic. Marco, with feelings of patriotism, joined one of the warships. Ironically, the man who had traveled around the world was captured in the Mediterranean. In 1298, in the Battle of Curzola, the Venetian fleet was defeated, and Marco was among the Genoese prisoners. While in a Genoese prison, he came across his cellmate Rustichello from Pisa. Rustichello was actually a popular romance writer, had written books on Arthurian legends. He was fascinated by Marco's stories. In that dark cell, in the flickering light of a candle, Marco told Rustichello about his years. Every night, the memories he pulled from the depths of his memory were transferred to paper from the tip of Rustichello's pen. Il Milione, the Book of Millions, was born this way. Kublai Khan's palaces, China's great cities, precious stones, exotic animals, different religions and traditions. Pages filled up. Marco wasn't just telling what he saw. He was also making intercultural comparisons, presenting objective observations. When the book was completed, Europe became acquainted with things it had never heard before. But the reaction was different from expected. Most people found these stories exaggerated, even fabricated. Can there be cities of millions? Is paper money possible? How can black stone burn? They asked. They gave him the nickname Marco Millions, meaning the man who exaggerates and magnifies everything. He was met with condescension and suspicion, but the book was still being copied, spreading. Even though people were skeptical, they were curious. After Marco got out of prison, he led a quiet life in Venice. He married Donata Badoer, had 3 daughters, Fantina, Belela, and Moretta. He continued his trade, but was no longer an ordinary merchant. He was a living legend. People came to see him. In his house were items brought from the East: Chinese porcelain, silk fabrics, precious stones. He would show these to guests, tell their stories. He also told his daughters about the places he visited, spoke of the beauties of different cultures. As years passed, his book spread throughout Europe. It was translated into French, Latin, German. Even though people still received it with suspicion, it also aroused curiosity. Especially young travelers and merchants wanted to see the world Marco described. In 1324, on his deathbed, the priest and relatives asked him, "Marco, now tell the truth. Weren't those stories exaggerated? Be cleansed of your sins." In this period, people would confess everything they had lied about before dying. Marco's last words went down in history. "I have not told even half of what I saw." These words proved his honesty and the reality of his stories. Indeed, Marco had seen much, but had been able to tell only a part of it. And indeed it was so. Marco's book forever changed Europe's view of the world. The maps he drew, the trade routes he described, the cultures he introduced. 200 years later, Christopher Columbus would set out for America, carrying Marco Polo's book with him. There were notes in the margins of the book, in Columbus's own handwriting. Is there another way to find the riches Marco described? He had asked himself. Vasco da Gama was looking for the spice ports Marco mentioned when going to India. Magellan was targeting the Moluccas Islands Marco described when circumnavigating the world. All the great explorers were following in Marco's footsteps. He wasn't just an explorer. He was the inspiration for explorers. After Marco's death, his family tried to preserve his legacy. His daughters married and had children, but none were as adventurous as their father. However, Marco's story was told for generations. Children growing up in Venice would say, "I want to be like Marco Polo." The influence of his book was not limited to geographical discoveries. The cultural wealth Marco described caused the birth of a new way of thinking in Europe. People learned that different ways of life were possible. They understood that other religions, other traditions, could also be valuable. During the Renaissance, Marco's work was rediscovered. Humanists appreciated his objective observations. Leonardo da Vinci was inspired by the Chinese technologies Marco described. Michelangelo was influenced by the beauty of Eastern art. In the 16th century, a monument was erected to Marco in Venice. It still stands in the small square next to San Lorenzo Church. On it is written, "Marco Polo, the man who introduced the world to Europe." But Marco's real monument was his stories, his maps, and the legacy he left to humanity. In the 17th century, great philosophers began talking about Marco. Voltaire called him the father of intercultural understanding. Montesquieu showed Marco's objective observations as an example. For Enlightenment age thinkers, Marco was the pioneer of unbiased observation. In the 18th century, archaeologists and historians began to verify what Marco told. When excavations were made in China, the palaces Marco described were found. It was understood how accurate the maps he drew were. The skeptics were silenced. Marco had indeed told what he saw. In the 19th century, Marco Polo had already become a legend. Hollywood films, opera, ballet. Marco's story was told in every branch of art. But none were as impressive as the real Marco. In the modern age, scientists studied Marco's journey in detail. They tracked his route with GPS technology, revisited the places he described. Every research proved what a careful observer Marco was. China's modern Silk Road project, the Belt and Road Initiative, directly follows the routes Marco drew. Even in the 21st century, his vision maintains its validity. Trade and cultural bridges between East and West still recall Marco's dream. Marco Polo Airport in Venice, Marco Polo hotels all over the world. His name still symbolizes adventure, discovery, courage. This is no coincidence. He is a living source of inspiration. Today, if a young person is studying in China, they know Marco Polo's story. He is seen as the first pioneer of West-East cultural exchange. Chinese call him Marco Polo and remember him with respect. They don't forget that he introduced China to Europe with love. When Silk Road tours are organized, guides use Marco's notes. Marco saw this here, noted this, they say. 700 years later, he is still being used as a guide. In universities, anthropology and history departments study the Marco Polo case. How to make objective observations, how to overcome cultural prejudice, how to understand and describe different civilizations. Marco is the pioneer of all of these. Marco Polo wasn't just a traveler. He was a bridge between East and West, between past and future, between the known and the unknown. His courage wasn't just physical, it was mental courage. The courage to set aside prejudices and embrace different worlds with an open heart. Even in the 21st century, Marco's message is valid. The world is big, but at the same time small. Cultures that seem different can actually learn from each other. Humanity is common, but diversity is wealth. This thought is still revolutionary today. Today there are new Marco Polos. Astronauts going to space, scientists exploring ocean depths, anthropologists meeting new cultures. They're all following in Marco's footsteps. Young people choosing careers say, I want to be like Marco Polo. But being Marco Polo isn't just traveling. It means being curious, learning, sharing, being a bridge. Marco's real legacy lies not in his book, but actually in his way of thinking. He was the first European to say, the unknown is not frightening, it is exciting. He showed different cultures are not threats, they are learning opportunities. He proved distant lands are not enemy territories, they are treasures waiting to be discovered. His greatest achievement wasn't just geographical discovery, it was crossing mental boundaries. He told people, the world is much bigger and more beautiful than you think. This message is still valid 700 years later. Marco's story is actually all of our stories. Every person can experience their own Marco Polo journey. Maybe we cannot travel physically, but we can set out on discovery mentally. Learning a new language, trying to understand a different culture, setting aside prejudices, and being open-minded. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, in your dreams, you can follow Marco's roots. That magical journey starting from Venice's narrow canals and extending to China's wide plains. In your dreams, you can walk on those old caravan roads, hear the sounds of different languages, smell various scents. And who knows, maybe one day you too will write your own Marco Polo story, because his greatest message was this: every person can live their own epic journey. One just needs to be brave, curious, open-minded. Marco Polo's spirit is still among us today. In every new discovery, in every cultural bridge, in every brave step, his trace exists. He is not just a historical figure left in the past. He is a living source of inspiration. In gondolas swaying under moonlight in Venice's canals, Marco's ghost may still be wandering. whispering to young travelers, "The world is still waiting to be discovered. One just needs to look with different eyes."